to open the border for those stranded overseas, but not until mid-January. The opposition questioned why fully vaccinated travellers couldn't take advantage of the new regime right now. Here's our political editor, Jane Patterson.
Fully vaccinated New Zealanders and other eligible people will be able to travel from Australia without the need for managed isolation from mid-January. From the end of April, nearly everyone will be able to travel here if they meet the public health criteria. There will be requirements including negative pre-departure tests, travel declarations and 7 days home isolation. Even that will look different, as it could be in a household with others going about their daily lives. National says the timing's a disgrace, labelling Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern the Grinch who stole Christmas.
A New Zealander living in Denmark says she'll probably cry the moment she touches down in Aotearoa. Annabelle Weber, who hasn't been back since the borders closed, says her family is excited to come home.
I think I'll just cry for the first few days. I mean, to see my family, and we lost my father-in-law in very tragic circumstances. And I haven't had a hug from my family since then. And it's a lot of emotion.
A New Zealand couple who have been stranded for months in a motorhome in Queensland have booked a flight to Christchurch on the day the border reopens. Sue Norton says the travel bubble closed the day they were due to return home, and they've been trying to secure a room in MIQ ever since.
I was on the phone very quickly to the flight centre who booked me flights, and we're on the first flight into Christchurch on the 17th. And I cannot wait to land. Not having had a date has been very difficult to live with.
Legislation setting up the traffic light system, including mandating vaccinations for some workers, has been pushed through Parliament in less than 24 hours. Passed under urgency, the bill faced fierce opposition from National, ACT and Te Pāti Māori. The National Party's Chris Bishop called it secretive, divisive and unduly rushed.
To ram it through without a select committee process and without any post-enactment scrutiny sends the message to the anti-vaxxers out there and those concerned about mandates and those concerned about certificates. It sends the message that they do have something to fear, that there is something to hide.
ACT says the government had plenty of time to use the regular process, while the Māori Party calls it a cruel law change that will victimise vulnerable communities. The Waitangi Tribunal has granted a special inquiry into the government's handling of the pandemic for Māori. The inquiry will take place over a week from December 6th. Marnie Dunlop reports.
The application was filed last week by the Māori Council and other leaders who say the COVID response framework significantly and irreversibly prejudices Māori. The tribunal granted the urgent hearing given the national significance of the matter and the pace of policy development and potential impacts for Māori. The inquiry will look into the disproportionate numbers of Māori vaccination rates and COVID-19 cases. It will also ask whether the Crown's vaccination strategy and the protection framework, also known as the traffic light system, are consistent with Te Tiriti o Waitangi and its principles.
The chair of a Royal Commission of Inquiry says she's already heard from many former St Peter's students before the school's apology for historical abuse yesterday. The prominent Waikato boarding school has found 19 boys suffered sexual, physical or emotional abuse between 1936 and 1981, and cases involving 8 former staff. The Abuse and Care Chair, Coral Shaw, says the apology is one small step forward toward redress. She's encouraging other survivors of abuse at St Peter's or other faith-based boarding schools to share their experiences with the Commission. It's 5:04. Vaccine hesitancy among some silver ferns could derail their upcoming tests. New Zealand Netball confirmed yesterday the silver ferns will head to London in January for a quad series against hosts England, Australia and South Africa. The silver ferns coach Dame Nolene Taurua is relieved the tournament is going ahead in a year that also includes the Commonwealth Games in Birmingham, but she concedes few players remain unvaccinated.
We're actually ticking along quite nicely in regards to players being vaccinated and still working through with a few. But we've got to also make sure that we keep the safety of all staff members, players, but also that freedom of choice.
The New Zealand Breakers are hopeful they'll be back on court tomorrow. The NBL side are self-isolating in Melbourne after yesterday's confirmation of 4 positive COVID-19 cases in their touring party. With the season only 10 days away, Breakers captain Tom Abercrombie is optimistic the team will be able to return to training tomorrow. Australia's Test cricket has only learnt of Tim Paine's shock resignation as captain half an hour before he announced that publicly he was stepping down because of a sexting scandal. Batter Marcus Harris says the squad fully support him to continue as wicketkeeper for the upcoming Ashes series against England starting next month. Harris says Paine has done a good job as captain in a difficult couple of years for the side. That's the news.
Navigating vaccine passports.
Police do not have the resources to go around and enforce mask wearing.
Finding out why albatrosses are splitting up.
Females are the one initiating divorce.
And it's NASA versus the asteroid.
It's the size of Texas, Mr. President. It's what we call a global killer, the end of mankind.
Armageddon was blowing it up, which is not what we want to do, blowing up.
And now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Thursday. Northland to Waitangi, including Coromandel Bay, have plenty Taupo and Taumaranui. Cloudy at times with isolated showers, possibly heavy in Northland this evening. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay gradually becoming fine, also fine for tomorrow. Taranaki to Wellington, including Taihape and Wairarapa, mainly fine, cloud increasing tomorrow evening. Nelson, Marlborough and Canterbury fine, isolated showers inland, a chance of early fog for parts of the Canterbury Plains tomorrow. Bulla and Westland fine, apart from some isolated showers inland, cloud increasing tomorrow with a few showers from the afternoon. Otago and Southland mainly fine, however a few light spots of rain tomorrow night. Fiordland fine, cloudy with drizzle tomorrow, turning to rain at night, and for the Chatham Islands cloudy at times. It's 7 minutes past 5.
Nā mihi marama, tēnā koutou katoa, no mai haere mai ki checkpointi tēnei rā, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. Dust off the open sign, the government's flinging open the doors to New Zealand, well sort of, just not right now and not all at the same time. But MIQ as you know it is on the way out. Here is the important stuff. 11:59pm, Sunday the 16th of January, all fully vaccinated Kiwis can travel to Aotearoa from Australia, bypassing MIQ and heading straight home to self-isolate for 7 days. They'll have to meet some COVID testing requirements too. Double-dosed Kiwis from all other countries can basically head home from the 13th of February. They'll be able to self-isolate too. Unvaccinated New Zealand returnees will still have to go into MIQ. And from April 30th, the Arrivals Lounge opens for all other fully vaccinated travellers, like tourists, to head to New Zealand. But that reopening will be staged over time. Details to follow. Ko taku manuhiri nai nei ko Chris Hipkins, COVID Response Minister. Tēnā koe, Minister.
Tēnā koe, Lisa.
Did you feel like Santa today?
Look, I acknowledge that for a lot of people this will come as a big relief. They've got some certainty around dates and they can make plans. I acknowledge that there's other people who would like to see us moving much faster. What we're trying to do here is balance risk and make sure that we're reopening the borders in a way that's, planned, managed and as safe as we possibly can.
Let's clarify some of the details. We've only been talking for about 60 seconds and the questions are coming in from our listeners. When you say New Zealanders, Kiwis and eligible travellers will be allowed over those borders without MIQ, what do you mean? What about non-Kiwi partners, spouses, children, permanent residents? What's the list of who's allowed?
So it is a reasonably encompassing definition, and it's the definition effectively of people who are eligible to go into MIQ now from those places. So that's Kiwi citizens, Kiwi permanent residents, people who normally live in New Zealand, and their dependent children and their partners.
Regardless of their citizenship status, the partners?
That's right. So in the case of the partners, they are able to come in now alongside their Kiwi. If you've got a Kiwi citizen as your partner, they're able to come in across the border through MIQ now if they can secure a space. So they would be able to come in because under our existing border settings, they're able to come in, and the only real constraint is just volume there. So they'll be eligible.
Okay. Will home isolation be monitored or checked at all?
We're working through more details on that. There are a variety of views, and we're just looking at the technology around that. It will need to be reasonably light touch in the sense that, a full-on monitoring regime would involve a lot of people and be very expensive. And we do recognise this is a transitional measure. We will eventually reach the point where, home isolation may not be required anymore for people coming across the border. But at this point, it's still a justified public health requirement, and so that's why we're putting it in place.
So you can stay in a house with other people there there with you who aren't self-isolating. They can go to work and go about their business. Returnees are able to travel to their end destination, which could be at the other end of the island. So why do we need home isolation at all, given those factors? Why not just have a testing regime?
Well, if you look at the public health measures that are going to be in place around transit, when this will be for everyone, people will be fully vaccinated, they'll be wearing their masks, they'll be doing all of the public health measures that we've currently got around, people who are travelling around the country, whether they're coming in from internationally or not. So that helps to turn the risk down there. The people will be doing a test immediately before they get on the plane to come here, or, in that period right before they come here, so they've already had a negative pre-departure test. They'll be doing another test when they arrive in the country, either at the airport or potentially as soon as they get home. Then when they're isolating at home, again there'll be testing there required, so if they start showing symptoms they can be tested. We'll know who they've been in contact with, and again it is just about that, trying to contain the virus rather than saying we have absolutely zero tolerance for any incursion of the virus, because we're in a different environment now.
It's still some weeks off, right? So what could stop this happening?
We're pretty locked in on those first 2 dates. So for New Zealanders coming back into the country, first of all from Australia and then from the rest of the world, and when I say New Zealanders, I mean that group that I have just mentioned, so a relatively wide definition there. Those 2 dates are locked in.
So Minister, just to be clear on that, because it's really important for people making plans. So are you basically giving a guarantee here and saying that regardless of what the case numbers are in New Zealand, regardless of the variants, for Kiwis who fit into those 2 categories, lock in the 16th of January and the 13th of February, nothing stopping this, basically?
Well, you never say absolutely never to anything when you're dealing with COVID. If we got a vaccine-resistant variant that started to rip around the world, we may well find that we're having to change a whole lot of things. But, the likelihood of that in the next couple of months, I would hope, means that that's not going to happen. But, it's always a possibility. So what we're saying is, barring something very unexpected and very, very bad, then, yes, we want to go ahead with this. So even if we're seeing increased case numbers in New Zealand, we're not going to be turning back these settings. One of our goals here is to keep moving forward, and one of the reasons that we're stepping out the changes rather than doing them all in as a big bang is we've looked at the countries that have tried that approach, and typically they found that it results in a massive skyrocket in case numbers, skyrockets in the pressure on their health systems, and they end up reimposing restrictions even if it's only short term. We want to try and avoid that flip-flopping around, so we want to just keep progressively removing the restrictions in a way that we can sustain so we don't have to go backwards.
So from the 30th of April, others will be allowed into the country. So tourists, right, potentially, months away. How are businesses supposed to survive the sort of dry summer that awaits them?
Oh, look, this will still result in a significant increase in people coming into the country. And it will also, we've still got, I think our tourism business have done very well in stimulating domestic tourism. And I'm sure that they'll continue to do that over the summer holiday period. So, look, there is still a lot to look forward to. And, of course, when we can safely reopen for visitors and for tourists from offshore, then we'll be doing that.
A couple of quick answers, if you could, Minister. Will New Zealand 5 to 11-year-olds be able to be vaccinated by the time you let tourists in? International ones?
Don't yet know, but we are expecting to be able to do, when I say don't know, can't give a guarantee, but we are expecting to be able to get into the delivery of paediatric doses in the first quarter of the year.
Are you able to check the vaccine certificates coming from other countries, Australia and New Zealand? Are they compatible certificates? And what about European countries?
It's not. We will be able to check for international border purposes European vaccine certificates because we've got a mutual recognition arrangement with Europe. In terms of the domestic vaccine certificates, those coming in will need to use their international vaccine certificate to get one of our domestic certificates that they can then use for access to venues and so on.
When you talk about you have to be fully vaccinated, are you including boosters? And what if you're coming from a country that has a different policy around vaccinating 12 years old and up?
So at the moment, the definition for us of fully vaccinated is that you've had 2 doses of the approved vaccines that we've got, or 1 dose. So I think there's only one dose vaccine, and that's the Janssen vaccine. So if you've had that, then you're counted as fully vaccinated. Boosters aren't currently a requirement for that, but they may well be in the future.
From what age, Minister?
In terms of our requirements at the border, that's 18 plus, and the reason for 18 plus is because some other countries around the world aren't yet making vaccines available to the under 18s, and so we have to manage that in an equitable way.
And from December, will the Defence Force be clocking off at MIQs?
No, they won't. The Defence Force will be staging an exit from MIQ, though, but we're still going to have MIQ for a while, so there'll probably be more people working in the sort of private security space of MIQ, because we still need MIQ for the unvaccinated, for those who don't fit into our border exemption categories and so on, to bring in more, more critical workers and so on. We'll still be using MIQ for some time.
So who exactly will run it, Minister?
It'll still be run by MIQ, by MB, who are running it at the moment. They've been very well supported by Defence. They've been very well supported by Defence and Police, who will continue to support, but the ratios of Defence Force people versus civilians will probably start to change over in the early part of next year.
Appreciate your time this evening. That is the COVID Response Minister, Chris Hipkins. So, international travel and family reunions abroad will soon be back on the cards, with most saying the time to bust open the international border is well overdue. Our reporter Nick Trubridge hit the streets of Auckland soon after the news broke and started asking people how they feel about New Zealand's gradual reopening.
We've got to get people back into the country, obviously safely, but it'll mean the most to tourism and hospitality to have those borders open and everyone coming and going.
I'm not the best person to give advice. I think the government needs to take scientific advice and not advice from the business roundtable.
I don't understand why they have to wait so long to have their human rights honoured. They're New Zealanders, they should be able to come home now. If there aren't MIQ spaces for them, they should be able to self-isolate at home, just like people in New Zealand, in Auckland, with COVID are doing today. There's 4,000 people with COVID. This is obscene.
Do you know, or have you heard of people who have been stuck overseas through this whole thing?
Yes, family and friends, people who can't get home, who've given up with the lottery system. I mean, and why? They've announced something now, but it seems like an announcement about an announcement, because this is miles away. We're talking about 2022.
They were told to come home, and they chose not to. And yes, I assume they will make use of it now if they're allowed to come home. But the kind of people I know think about their community and society as well as themselves.
I've got family in Australia, and they've got, we've already started to plan like a family reunion for next year, so I think it'll be really nice to see them, because it's been, quite a bit, so yeah.
I've got family in both the United States and Canada, and I must say I really appreciate New Zealand's position on where we've gone with COVID and our COVID safety protocols, and I can't wait to have my family come and visit, and also visit there. So,
when did you see them last?
It would be 2 years ago now, and so I missed some pretty big events, and I can't wait to see them.
Homai o whakaaro, we would love your feedback. Nō reira anei na kaupapa mō te hōtaka nei. What do you think of the timings for the border reopening, the staging there? 16th of January for people coming from Australia, MIQ free, you just have to home isolate. And 13th of February for more far-flung countries. Let us know your thoughts. Pātui mai, text me 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or you can email us checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. It is 19 minutes past 5. Kia ora rawatu mō te whakarongo mai. Haere nei, coming up, the return of tourists is still months away, so can businesses make it through a long, dry summer? It's over for cheap money, with the Reserve Bank hiking the OCR for the second time in 2 months. The rate is up by 0.25 percentage point to 0.75%, the highest rate since February last year. The move was expected, but with more rises on the way, experts are warning pressures lie ahead for businesses and homeowners. Here's our business reporter, Anand Zaki.
The Reserve Bank says the official cash rate rise is a reaction to rising inflation. Governor Adrian Orr says the worry is inflation will become entrenched, and the bank did consider a rise of 50 basis points but settled for 25.
What you see today is our best foot forward around with the balance of risks as we see it. Slow, steady changes in the official cash rate give us more optionality to observe how the economy is behaving and balancing the risks that are in front of us.
Mr. Orr says he understands the pain for first home buyers, who will find it even harder to enter the market. Retail banks were quick to react, with the ANZ and ASB lifting their lending and deposit rates. The head of fixed income at Fisher Funds, David McLeish, says the level of OCR rise was no surprise.
With 21 of the 23 economists surveyed by Bloomberg predicting only a 25 basis point rise today, I'd say that it was, and in line with the expectation announcement when it comes to the headline raise.
Mr McLeish says what today's announcement means for households is their pockets will be hit by a double whammy.
Higher borrowing costs are hurting them in the pocket. It's removing disposable income from the household, but also at the same time, higher inflationary pressures, so higher costs of goods and services that they're consuming is also reducing their purchasing power. So they're getting hit by both sides at the moment.
Adrian Orr says people benefited with ultra-low rates last year, and households should have been prepared.
Households who have a lot of debt or homeowners who have just entered the market with extremely high leverage levels have to be incredibly wary and understand they're going to have to be able to weather through higher interest rates. We have talked about this forever, yet we still get complaints, I can't buy my first house without a zero deposit. So you have to be able to put the whole thing together.
The Canterbury Employers Chamber of Commerce Chief Executive Leanne Watson says the rate rise will mean more costs for struggling businesses.
From a small business perspective, there are a significant number of small businesses who are, cash poor. They're stretched and stressed financially. They've incurred a huge amount of debt, obviously, over the last couple of years with the impact of COVID, so any additional cost for them in particular is going to be challenging.
The Reserve Bank says further rate rises can be expected given the medium-term outlooks for high inflation and employment. It signalled a timetable of OCR rises to around 2.5% by the end of 2023.
It is 22 minutes past 5. Kia mau tonu mai. Stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. One of the country's great walks is off limits while the iwi that has responsibility over the area tries to get vaccination rates up. Te Urewera has been closed to visitors since Delta arrived in the country and will not reopen till the end of January. The area includes the Lake Waitangi track and the lake itself, popular for hikers and holidaymakers alike. Tuhoi says it's also closed because of unsafe infrastructure due to continued Crown under-resourcing. Māori News reporter Matai O'Connor has this story.
As part of the Ngāi Tūhoi Treaty Settlement in 2014, Te Urewera was given legal personality, which means it has the same legal status as an individual person. But this year, with the COVID-19 Delta outbreak, the Te Urewera board decided to close it to everyone. A tractor's been put in front of the boat ramp blocking access to Lake Waikaremoana. The president of the Waikaremoana Boating and Fishing Association, David Parker, says they have been working with Tuhoi over the last 12 months to better their relationship. But yesterday's news that it will be closed until the end of January came as a surprise. However, he understands the concerns Tuhoi have with reopening the area to all New Zealanders.
It is documented that Tamati has said that it is not in the best interests of Tuhoi to open Lake Waikaremoana any earlier. They're concerned about COVID and health and safety issues.
Conservation Minister Kitty Allen says the 2014 Te Urewera Act means all responsibilities and decision-making for the area goes to the Te Urewera Board. She has spoken with the board and offered support to get the area reopened.
From my perspective, and look, we've got a framework, an overarching framework that the government has supported, and look, my advice to the board has been to work with public health agencies to ensure that they're getting the best advice that they need as well to make the decisions to keep their whānau safe.
Kitty Allen says the iwi cannot make the closure of the area permanent. However, she seems to be at odds with the board and was told a different opening date.
You can make temporary closures on the basis of health and safety grounds. My expectation, and from the conversations that I've had with the chairperson of the Urewera board, is that there will be an opening in December.
In a statement, the Department of Conservation says during the closure period, Tuhoi and the agency will aim to repair infrastructure to bring it up to health and safety standards. It describes this as an unprecedented relationship model that no one has a blueprint for and says it's working together with Te Urewera at the centre of all decision making. RNZ requested an interview with Te Urewera Board Chair Tamati Kruger. He was unavailable. But he told Morning Report the key reason why it was closed is part of the tribe's pandemic response.
Tourist operators in towns are facing a long, dry summer with international visitors still at least 5 months away. The government's announced a gradual reopening of the border starting mid-January for double-dosed New Zealanders. But fully vaccinated foreign travellers won't be allowed in until at least April 30th, more than 2 years after the border slammed shut. Even then, it'll be a staggered return. Those full details are still to come. And all visitors will have to self-isolate at home for 7 days. That means another summer without overseas visitors for our major tourist hotspots. Ruth Stokes from the Queenstown Chamber of Commerce joins me now. Hi Ruth, are you happy that you've finally got a date?
Hi Lisa, yes, happy we have a date, not happy it's so far away.
Yeah, so when do you think it should be?
Starting from the middle of January with Australians first. If we can travel there, they should be able to come here.
So what does this mean then? 5 months until April, and then we don't know entirely the details of who's going to be let in first?
No, we don't. And the reality is that a week's isolation is just too damaging to our New Zealand tourism brand. Who's going to want to come all the way here to spend a week in a hotel room?
What would your usual summer look like in terms of tourists? Because the government's saying the demand domestically is pretty strong and they're going to be unleashing more than 1.5 million Aucklanders.
Look, absolutely, domestic demand is strong, but it's not strong for the mountains in summer, Lisa. Last summer we saw an average hotel occupancy in Queenstown of 37%, and that's against a national average of 67%. So it shows you that they were at the beach, they weren't in the mountains.
Yeah, what is the survival rate looking like for businesses there? Because I imagine some people would have thought, well, if I can just hold on to the summer.
Absolutely, and quite frankly, it's amazing we've had the businesses hold on that we have. It's not just about those that have folded up the tent and gone home. One of the stats that is quite revealing are the number of businesses that actually can't meet their bills. The number of credit defaults is increasing. I'd hate to hazard a guess at how many businesses this will just be the last straw for.
What is the situation with workers as well? Because there is a large migrant workforce. Are you going to be able to keep the people you've got? And what about getting other workers?
You raise a fantastic point, Lisa. One of the key challenges about opening the borders for New Zealanders to be able to leave means we're going to lose not just our migrant workforce, but our New Zealanders who will go to other opportunities in other places where they can travel freely and see their families and friends when they want to.
So the April date, we are told that there's going to be more details about that staged return for international visitors. How would you like that to work?
Really, we'd actually like to understand from the government what are the parameters that they would consider to accelerate the return of those international visitors. We hear about Auckland doing the heavy lifting, and absolutely it's been a rotten time for them over the last few months. But these businesses, not just in Queenstown, but all over New Zealand, the West Coast, Mackenzie Country, etc., they've done it tough for nearly 2 years. So really we're looking for some clarity around how can we make this happen faster when we're the most vaccinated country in the Western world.
So you want them to back down on that April 30 date?
We'd certainly like to see it earlier.
And if they don't do that, come April 30th, who should get priority? Should it be specialised high-demand workers? Should it be tourist trade? Where would you like to see the priority put?
If it has to be the end of April, I would like to see us opening to workers first. We've already seen Australia move this week to allowing in working holiday visas and foreign students. It certainly would give us the best opportunity to get prepared before the borders were open further. But at the moment, the situation looks like we're going to lose people and we're not going to get visitors anytime soon.
Thanks for joining us, Ruth. That's Ruth Stokes, who's from the Queenstown Chamber of Commerce. E te iwi e haere ake nei I a checkpoint. The open sign's out, but returning unvaxxed Kiwis will still be sent to MIQ. We visit a new one just opened today. A $3,000 incentive for some workers to get their COVID jab. And who's the Grinch stealing the South Island's Christmas mojo. Homai o whakaaro, we would love your feedback on anything you've heard on the programme this evening. You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. It is time now for the headlines. Ko marama anō tēnei.
Thank you, Lisa. The COVID-19 response minister, Chris Hipkins, says barring something very unexpected and very bad happening, the first 2 dates for relaxing border restrictions are locked in. Mr Hipkins told Checkpoint that the government will not be going back on today's announcement that from the 17th of January, fully vaccinated New Zealanders and other eligible travellers can arrive from Australia without staying in managed isolation or quarantine. That will expand to New Zealanders coming from the rest of the world on the 14th of February. Under the new rules, unvaccinated New Zealanders returning home will still need to spend 7 days in an MIQ facility and 3 days of home isolation. Legislation setting up the traffic light system, including mandating vaccinations for some workforces, has been pushed through Parliament in less than 24 hours. Passed under urgency, the bill faced fierce opposition from National, ACT and Te Pāti Māori. The Waitangi tribunal has granted a special inquiry into the government's handling of the pandemic for Māori. The application was filed last week by the Māori Council and other leaders who say the COVID framework significantly and irreversibly prejudices Māori. The inquiry will take place over a week from December 6th. The chair of a Royal Commission of Inquiry says she had already heard from many former St Peter's students before the school's apology for historical abuse yesterday. The prominent Waikato boarding school has found 19 boys suffered sexual, physical or emotional abuse between 1936 and 1981 in cases involving 8 former staff. The Abuse and Care Chair, Coral Shaw, says the apology is one small step toward redress. And the chair of Kiwi Rail says an independent review into anonymous allegations of bullying will continue despite the chief executive's resignation. Greg Miller has stood down immediately, saying while he rejects the allegations, they have become a distraction. Those are the headlines. Our next news update is at 6.
Kia ora rā e hoa, no mai hoki mai. This is Checkpoint, ko Lisa Owen tēnei, ko taku hoa e nai ko Nona Peltier, who is here to talk business. Let's start with the insurance company Tower, Nona. It's, had underlying earnings that have tumbled. And what's all that about?
Yeah, well, it's partly because they've had a number of expensive house claims. That's because of a lot of fires. There's also been severe weather events. We're talking about floods. And that's resulted in a difficult financial year for the company. But never mind that, they still got a pretty good reaction from the market. Their share price finished up 8.5%. And the reason why is because they've announced a new risk-based pricing model for flood risks. So that's going to result in some customers paying more for their insurance. They've also increased their market share as well. And so the company's taken action to address those costs, and they're also considering possibly returning some value to shareholders through a compulsory share buyback, and so the market quite like that.
And Nona, another class action has been filed against the specialty dairy company A2 Milk.
Yeah, so we talked about this before. There was a claim that was made in October by an organization called Slater and Gordon Lawyers, and that was filed in the Supreme Court of Victoria. Now, this is another one. This is from a different group. This is from a company called Shine Lawyers. These guys have also filed a class action against A2 Milk, and that's also in the Supreme Court of Victoria. Now, the background to this is basically the company made 4 earnings downgrades in 6 months, and that saw their share price slump by about 70%. Now, the allegation is that they didn't properly disclose their position. The company has said, and they said this again last week at their annual meeting, that they for sure, they complied at all times with disclosure obligations. They've denied any liability, and they're going to vigorously defend themselves in court. So that's that with A2 Milk. And look, we saw their share price come off a little bit later in the afternoon, but it finished up about 0.75%. So obviously the market is taking that in its stride.
Speaking of the market, let's take a quick gallop around the numbers.
Right, so the local top 50 index, it rose 0.2%, 78 points up to 12,767. Pretty good because the rest of the region is looking a little bit weak. The New Zealand dollar, though, it dropped down to 69.1 US cents, and that was following the Reserve Bank's announcement regarding the OCR, the official cash rate there. The market was expecting something a bit more dramatic, and they got the soft touch. So that certainly saw the New Zealand dollar fall about 0.5%, and it finished up the day here at 69.1 US cents, 95.9 Australian and 51.7 pence.
Ngā mihi Nona, ka kite, that's Nona Peltier with Our Business News. Would $3,000 in bonuses entice you to get the COVID jab? A Rotorua timber company is dishing out big bucks in a bid to get as many workers as possible double-dosed. Next week, the Prime Minister will reveal which level each region will enter the new COVID Traffic Light System Act, with vaccination rates a key factor. Rotorua, where Red Stag is based, has double vax rates of just 77%, with Māori lagging even further behind and just 60%. Well, joining me now is CEO Marty Very. Marty, can you explain the deal? What do people need to do to get the bucks?
Yeah, good evening, Lisa. Well, first of all, they need to be vaccinated, double vaccinated by the end of this month. For those that that can't make it in time because they've only just started getting vaccinated now, we've pushed it out to the end of January. But basically, we're putting a December bonus this year of $2,000, and those who stay vaccinated next year get another $1,000 in December. And basically, they'll need to show their their vaccination status on their COVID app.
So what kind of rates do you have within the company at the moment, do you think?
A month or so ago, we were about 70%. Now we're going to find out, obviously, on the 1st of December, basically what rate we've managed to achieve. But until then, what we have observed is there's a really, really strong uptake driven by the bonus. Those people sitting on the fence seem to have been, assisted to make that decision. We're not expecting to get 100, but we would like to. But we're just really trying to make sure that we look after our staff and their colleagues and their families next year. But we really want to make sure we can operate next year and not have to have shutdowns of the site. So we're sort of thinking, well, the best way to do that is to make sure as many people as possible are vaccinated. It's a kind of a fence at the top of the cliff strategy to ensure we can operate.
So is this just staff, Marty, or are you offering it to contractors as well?
It is the on-site contractors as well. So we need the permanent on-site contractors. So we basically recognise that we want everybody at Red Stag Timber to be as safe as possible.
So how many staff is it all up then? And staff and contractors, how big is the pool of people?
It's around about 400.
Okay, so basically you think the cost of a lockdown or COVID restrictions is far more expensive than paying a bonus of $3,000 in terms of the economics of it?
There's a bit in it, really. We looked at the performance of the company this year and next year and the forecasts, and we realised that by the time we allow for the capital requirements, the cash requirements, the return to the shareholders, we're forecasting a surplus that we'd like to give back to our staff simply because they've earned it. They've worked really, really hard to keep up with the construction industry, and we want them to be as safe as possible. But also next year we can achieve that target budget next year by being open. So it's really, really important to us that we do everything we can to stay open. And because we supply about 30% of the structural timber in New Zealand, we've got so many clients and the merchant clients and so many builders and all the tradespeople that flow from that are reliant on the Red Stag sawmill operating. So, there's quite a responsibility there. And we thought, well, let's just do everything we can to get ahead of it.
You guys took the wage subsidy, didn't you?
We did, yeah.
Yeah, to what kind of value?
Well, to the full extent for the lockdown last
year.
So
how many thousands do you reckon you got?
It was about 2 million of the total wage subsidy.
And so, are you paying any of that back?
Well, that is effectively, we're saying, well, we don't need that. We have used it to top up the salaries, the wages in the previous lockdowns to 100%. So we've utilised some of it there, and now we're saying there's roughly 1.2 million left. across 400 staff, $3,000. Let's give it back to them. They're going to use it better in the local community than if we give it back to the central government. God knows the local community needs it with the tourism numbers having turned off. So whatever we can do to sort of, support the local community, get us at Rotorua into a green or an orange light system, so that as many New Zealanders can get there, despite but when there's no international tourism, then that's something we want to trigger.
So, Marta, you're basically redistributing that wage subsidy, which in the end you realise you don't need. You obviously wouldn't have known that at the time you applied for it, because you're still coming up in the black. You are choosing, rather than pay that money back to the government, to funnel it out into the community via the workers with the bonus.
Absolutely, yeah.
And some people might not like that idea. What do you make of that?
Well, we claimed it, as everyone did. Effectively, it's not the same money, obviously. It's us saying we've hit budget. The company's tracking okay into next year. We think we're going to have that equivalent of money available to distribute as an extra bonus to our staff. We pay a bonus in the middle of the year as well, but this is an extra Christmas bonus this year and next year. And we're sort of going, well, look, there's a lot of inflation around at the moment as well. We want to help our staff and the on-site contractors deal with that and also have a great Christmas.
Good to talk to you, Marty. That is Marty Very, who's the CEO of Red Stag there. They're paying a bonus, $3,000 or up for fully vaccinated staff. Slip, slop, slap and swab could be the new summer checklist as the government prepares to roll out rapid COVID tests in holiday hotspots. A government pilot of the antigen tests is proving to be a success, with some participants calling for them to be rolled out to the general public as soon as possible. And while health experts warn the tests aren't as accurate as the usual nasal swabs, they say they're an important part of our COVID defences. Nita Blake-Person reports.
Hands gripping the steering wheel, eyes watering and nose stinging. Many of us are now fairly familiar with the uncomfortable feeling of a nasal swab and the slightly nervous and sometimes days-long wait for results. PCR testing has been a mainstay of New Zealand's COVID defence, but rapid antigen tests, which return results in 15 minutes and are much less invasive, could be about to boost our toolkit. The government's been trialling the tests with 29 businesses, including transport company Mainfreight. Managing Director Don Braid is thoroughly supportive.
It's a first responder, right? It's an indicator, and you can jump into a result really quickly and know that you either go for your PCR test to have it confirmed.
He says tests have been run across most of the company's major sites, including in Auckland yesterday.
They completed 80 tests in the space of less than an hour. It's relatively easy to do. Everybody is on a text messaging system. They do the test and have a result back within 15 minutes. And we haven't had any positive tests. We haven't had any invalid tests. And I think we've done in excess of 600 or 700 tests over the last couple of weeks.
Don Braid says Mainfreight uses rapid tests extensively in its overseas operations, and while they don't replace PCR testing, they give staff confidence they're safe.
Therefore, let's open up the import, take the import ban away and allow the importation of good quality antigen testing units and have them made available, particularly for business, and then ultimately they should be available at local pharmacies.
COVID Response Minister Chris Hipkins says rapid antigen testing is going to play an increasing role for surveillance testing purposes here.
We're going to see situations where rapid antigen testing is more widely used as part of those pre-departure testing requirements and is more likely to be more widely available at airports or near to airports for people to satisfy those pre-departure testing requirements. And as such, that will mean people are being tested much closer to their point of departure than the potentially 72 hours before when they leave. The world, I think, is going to be using rapid antigen tests more widely, and New Zealand will be using rapid antigen tests more widely.
At the moment, there are 3 types of antigen tests approved for import and use in New Zealand. Dr. Bloomfield says that's based on advice those are the best ones, but other companies are applying to be used here too.
We've ordered plenty for use, as the Minister's outlined, and also we're looking at the use of those more widely across New Zealand, particularly over the summer period, to complement PCR testing when there'll be, particularly in some holiday spots, there will be much larger numbers of people there.
University of Otago microbiologist and infectious diseases expert Professor David Murdoch last month said New Zealand could have been better prepared for various COVID testing methods, and he's keen to see rapid tests used to support the current PCR setup.
In general, if we have a system where the laboratories are able to give a good turnaround time with PCR, absolutely that's the test to use. But the rapid antigen tests really come into their own when that is a challenge. We have difficulty giving the quick turnaround or just accessibility, a place that doesn't have access to PCR.
That could include remote campgrounds or festivals and other mass gatherings. Professor Murdoch notes that antigen tests aren't as accurate as the PCR, which will detect COVID at a much lower level, but they do pick up the virus when people tend to be more infectious.
PCR tests, if somebody has COVID, the ability to be able to confirm that by the test is about in 90% of cases. So there's a small chance that we will miss a positive case. With these rapid antigen tests, that reduces to, and it's quite variable depending on the test, but can be in the kind of 50 to 80% range in the best situation.
The government trial of rapid tests has seen 16,281 swabs taken. There have been 9 positive rapid antigen tests and 65 invalid tests, and the positive test results were followed up with PCR tests. It's unknown how the tests will be used by the public over summer, but businesses wanting to use them in their workplace can apply online.
It is 14 minutes to 6. I'm Lisa Owen and you're with Checkpoints on RNZ National. Hey, Muriaki na pita kōrero. After the news at 6, the promise of a staged border reopening, an early Christmas gift or mean to make families wait past the festive season. Turn out the lights, the party's over before it even started in Oamaru at least. The council's canned its family-friendly New Year's Eve party at the Gardens because COVID has apparently made it all just too complicated. And things are looking dim for the Light Up the Tree event too. That's been moved online. Joining me now is the Waitangi Mayor, Gary Kircher. Gary, who's the Grinch here?
Yeah, COVID is an absolute dampener at this time of the year with so many events having to be called off or just changed from what they're supposed to be, unfortunately.
But is it really that complicated? Why couldn't you go ahead with it?
Where we were planning to have it was, in our public gardens. It was going to be wonderful with lots of trees and everything around, as you'd imagine. But if with the COVID pass system in place, it meant that you needed to be in an enclosed area, you needed to be able to control entry and exit and so forth and make sure you're checking passes as people come in and out. So that wasn't going to work unless we put up a very extensive area of fencing, and the other areas that we could have gone to wouldn't be the same. So that and a few other uncertainties just around exactly what traffic light colour will be and so on at that time meant we had to make a call at some stage. And I think all event organisers have to do this. They have to make a call before they've committed too much money and make a decision as to which way they're going to go.
But you find out Monday, right, what traffic light colour you're in. So why couldn't you just hold off until then? Until you knew for sure? Because oranges go for events like this.
Sure, yeah. I think there's just too much uncertainty whether we'd stay at that. And, the problem is still that we're almost at 90% in the Waitangi district, which is good for first jabs, and second jabs are following quite closely behind that. But, there's still too many people who aren't vaccinated. There's still a chance of spread. We've got lots of wonderful Aucklanders sharing themselves around the country on the 15th of December. So, there's just too many uncertainties around what's going to happen.
So, Gary, have Aucklanders killed the party?
No, we love them. They've done it hard, and the opportunity that they have given the rest of the country to actually get vaccinated has been very much appreciated. And it's just the way it is.
Have you jumped the gun though, Gary? I mean, have you jumped the gun? So Monday you get your traffic light colour, right? You're close to 90. Odds on you're probably orange. You chuck up a bit of temporary fencing. You would have swiped your groceries at the self checkout. That's what the vax certificate check is. Just boop 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 as people come in. Is it that hard?
For what funding we had available, it was there was that there was the commitments for bands that we had organised, and they've still got the ability to book other gigs, so that was part of the pressure as well. So yeah, just looking at how we do these things, and who knows? I mean, if it proves that we're closer to the time that we can do something, then we might throw something together that's a bit smaller, but still gives an opportunity for families to get out and enjoy New Year's Eve and see in a new year that hopefully is a bit better than the current one.
Yeah, and sometimes last-minute parties are the best. Thank you, Gary. That's Gary Kircher, who's the Waitangi mayor there. The days are numbered for MIQ for most people, with New Zealanders able to travel home and home isolate from January or February next year, depending on where they're coming from. But it'll stay in place for high-risk countries and for those coming in unvaccinated. And with that, a new facility has been unveiled in Christchurch today, and our reporter Rachel Graham and cameraman Nathan McKinnon went to check it out.
MIQ, the political football that's defined much of the angst over the COVID response in this country. Today, a new one is born, with guests due to arrive next week. So we took the chance to have a look inside, to see how it operates and what the future looks like for facilities like these. This is the Elms Hotel MIQ. It will just be for managed isolation, not for those who test positive for COVID. When a returnee arrives by bus from the airport, they're assessed by DHB staff and then checked into the hotel and given a room number. Pretty normal for a hotel guest, except for the Defence Force standing guard, the high fences surrounding the facility, and the CCTV camera set up in the bar, with Defence Force teams monitoring them at all times. Charge nurse Dave Monk explains that each day the guests are given a health check, one day on the phone and the next in person. If the person is symptomatic, they get some extra tests.
We'll do an oxygen saturation,
okay.
Check your temperature and heart rate. Great, so just a wee temperature check in your ear there, Rachel. Good, 37.1, that's all normal. Okay. And the next thing we're going to do is check your oxygen saturation. Okay. So I'm just going to pop your finger into a little machine. So that's great, so we finger. Superb. Great, so the top number is how much oxygen you're getting in through your lungs, and that's 99%, so that's all fine.
Okay, good. Including a COVID test.
So just going to slide this up into your nose, just breathing away nicely, breathing away, just breathing away. Here we go, fantastic, well done, excellent stuff. You can put your mask back on there. Can be a little bit of an eye tickler.
Yeah, a bit of an eye waterer. Yeah.
Well,
not that bad, yeah. While my first test wasn't a comfortable experience, I couldn't complain too much, knowing Dave Monk has notched up nearly 100 working at MIQ facilities. Dave says if guests start to have COVID symptoms or other health concerns after that daily check, they can contact the DHB staff at any time.
The normal process is that they would call us. We would then send a team of nurses out to do a health assessment. And from the information that we collect, we may even then notify the medical officer of health, who's a doctor for public health in Canterbury, get some guidance along from them, along with our colleagues in infection prevention and control, just on the best way to manage the symptoms and ensuring that safety is paramount for the guests as they stay here.
Since mid-November, the MIQ stay has been sliced in half to 7 days. Brigadier Rose King, the joint head of MIQ, says that hasn't necessarily meant more people have been able to come home.
We are increasing the number of quarantine spaces, which then decreases what's available for international returnees. In addition to that, there have been a number of policy decisions that we also have to accommodate. For example, an additional 300 spaces have been allocated to workforce per month, and we've also had an increase in our emergency allocation allocations itself, so that's gone up to 800 per month. So we also have to take into consideration those changes, and of course what is the future. We need to have some flexibility to ensure that we can deliver in New Zealand's time of need.
The Defence Force monitors all MIQ around the country. Brigadier King says she's waiting for more guidance from the government about how long that'll be the case.
There has been work and consultation going on with both NZDF and MB in regard to what is that workforce going forward, and there is a cabinet paper that will be going up, I'm not sure if it will be the end of this year or beginning of next year, in regard to the projections of NZDF commitment. But I think it would be reasonable to say that we are considering a downward trajectory of those with a possible release date in December, but again again, that is a cabinet decision.
Rose King says so far around 200,000 people have been through the MIQ process, and she expects there will be an ongoing need for MIQ for some time yet.
And if you want to check out the video with that story from Nathan McKinnon and Rachel, go online. We'll chuck it up on our web page. Today's big developments around the border also have implications for New Zealand's leading sports teams and elite athletes. While the news is good for many of our top international athletes, the changes place major doubt on Trans-Tasman leagues such as the new Super Rugby Pacific competition. To discuss what today's announcement means for sport is sports reporter Clay Wilson. So Clay, what does it mean for the top sports teams?
Kia ora, Lisa. Well, in a word, uncertainty would be the way to describe this, what it means for teams. You mentioned Super Rugby Pacific, this new competition starting next year. That's due to kick off in mid-February. Obviously, teams based in New Zealand and Australia, including the two new Pacific teams based on either side of the Tasman. There's Trans-Tasman matches scheduled from round one. But of course, under these new rules, those games can now no longer take place. So what are they going to do? New Zealand Rugby have issued a statement on today's news, basically saying they're digesting the announcement, the details of it, but they're saying they need more details and they're going to continue working on contingency plans. They're not elaborating on what those are, but outside of exemptions, you have to think perhaps maybe playing the domestic fixtures first and hoping by the time that those games are played that the rules have changed or they can get exemptions of some kind. But how they're going to make it work, I guess we'll see. And it's also the same for the New Zealand teams in three other sports: the Warriors in Rugby League's NRL, the Phoenix men and women in the A-League for football, and the Breakers basketballers. Now, it's not such bad news for the Warriors. Their first home game isn't penciled in until June 18th. So perhaps they're not so likely to be affected by the changes in this border situation. But returns home for the Phoenix, the Breakers, they become slightly more tricky. They're hoping to get home in January, February, early next year. They've got players in those teams who are not New Zealanders, so getting them in before that April date is obviously going to be an issue. And then obviously getting teams in for a one-off game is going to be an issue as well, because those teams coming in are going to have to do, even post-April at this point, going to have to do some kind of, we're going to have to do that 7-day self-isolation. So it becomes unworkable for them. So they're going to need to work with the government, and we understand some of them are working already with Sport New Zealand around solutions and how they're going to get around these new rules and make these competitions work.
Yeah, complicated pieces of the puzzle, Clay. But what about individual athletes?
Yeah, well, the news is much better for many of our top individual athletes. Some people would have noticed over the recent months there's been some outspoken New Zealand athletes who rely on overseas travel but haven't been eligible for MIQ exemptions like some of our leading teams, such as the All Blacks, the Black Caps. They've got those exemptions, but individual athletes haven't. These changes mean, of course, now that those athletes can now either go away or can come back from February, knowing they're not relying on that MIQ lottery system to be able to go away and compete and make a living, I guess. You talk about the likes of Tom Walsh, golfer Ryan Fox, triathlete Hayden Wild has been stuck overseas for a number of time, for a length of time, and then some of our leading mixed martial artists, our UFC stars, have been very outspoken about this. So I guess that frees them up now to compete and go away safe in the knowledge they can come back at their own convenience. And you have to think, given what they've dealt with so far, that 7-day isolation when they return perhaps won't seem like such a big deal.
Thanks, Clay. Bit of a mixed bag then. That is Clay Wilson, sports reporter there. A lot of you are getting in touch about the changes to MIQ2. On the border, this person says, too little, too late. Francis says, I really appreciate the various approach of the government to border opening, have a number of vulnerable family members. This makes it easier. Jackie's got in touch to say no business people or tourists will want to come to New Zealand from the end of April if they have to self-isolate in a hotel for 7 days. Different if you are a returning Kiwi and can isolate at home. Businesses, conferences and tourism will continue to suffer. Claire says, I'm very pleased with the government's handling of these timelines and balancing public health, trying not to overwhelm the public health system with the need for greater travelling ability. I agree with a phased approach. I have family overseas and it has been a nightmare, so this approach is all good with me. Nick says, fully vaccinated, negative testing Kiwis should be able to return home now and self-isolate like Australians can. But this one says other places like Hong Kong have lower COVID rates than Australia. Why are they discriminated against? My wife is stranded in Hong Kong, having gone urgently to be with her dying mother in May. She had tried the lottery system with no success. She is double vaxxed with Pfizer and could come home and isolate here. Fiona's got in touch to say we're off to Te Anau in Queenstown mid-January, just really hoping we won't get anti-Auckland sentiment.
RNZ News at 6 o'clock. Kia ora, I'm Marama Tipole. The COVID-19 response minister says the dates are locked in to reopen New Zealand's border next year. From January 17th, all fully vaccinated New Zealanders travelling from Australia can skip MIQ and self-isolate for 7 days. From April the 30th, international arrivals can return but will need to isolate for a week in a facility. Chris Hipkins has told Checkpoint unless a new uncontrolled coronavirus variant rips across the world before then, the dates are fixed.
It's always a possibility. So what we're saying is, barring something very unexpected and very, very bad, then, yes, we want to go ahead with this. So even if we're seeing increased case numbers in New Zealand, we're not going to be turning back these settings. One of our goals here is to keep moving forward.
Chris Hipkins says other countries that have allowed international travel to resume while vaccinated citizens self-isolate have seen case numbers balloon. The Māori Party has voted against legislation setting up the new traffic light system, saying it's cruel and leaves Māori behind. The bill, which includes mandating vaccinations for some workforces, has been pushed through Parliament under urgency in less than 24 hours. Te Pāti Māori co-leader Debbie Ngarewa-Paka told the House it could never support legislation that sidelined Māori leadership and divided and negatively profiled Māori.
How can our people be at the traffic lights when they're still caught up in the mess of the roadworks you have left, when you decided that 70% of our population did not matter in your vaccination program? This bill is cruel. It will never gain Te Pāti Māori's support.
The bill also faced fierce opposition from National and ACT. A Rotorua timber company is offering $3,000 to its staff to get as many workers as possible double-dosed. Red Stag Timber CEO Marty Very told Checkpoint offering the money to staff to get fully vaccinated is to protect the workforce and their families and help ensure the company can keep operating next year. He says the offer is for about 400 people. Part of the bonus comes from unused wage subsidy money. Participants in the government's rapid antigen pilot program want the tests rolled out to the general public as soon as possible. The tests return results in 15 minutes and are much less invasive than the usual PCR swabs, but are also less accurate. A trial is being run through 29 businesses, including transport company Mainfreight. Its managing director, Don Braid, says they won't replace PCR testing, but give staff confidence they're safe.
Therefore, let's open up the import, take the import ban away and allow the importation of good quality antigen testing units and have them made available, particularly for business, and then ultimately they should be available at local pharmacies.
More than 16,000 tests have been taken through the government trial. The Māori Crown Relations Minister says he supports the right of Māori to go to the Waitangi tribunal over the government's handling of the COVID response. The tribunal has granted a special hearing into the government's handling of the pandemic for Māori. The Māori Council and other leaders say the COVID response framework prejudices Māori. The Crown Māori Relations Minister, Kelvin Davis, says if Māori want to be heard, that's what the tribunal is there for. But he rejects accusations that the government hasn't been consulting with Māori.
I've been engaging weekly with iwi chairs, I've been engaging weekly with Tamaki Makaurau Hui, we've had CEs, we've had officials on answering questions. There's been a lot of engagement. Like I say, if Māori feel that they need to go to the tribunal, that's their right, and we support their right to go to the tribunal.
The head of the Reserve Bank says households and home buyers must get prepared for higher interest rates. The central bank today raised its cash rate by 25 basis points to 0.75% as it moved to keep inflation in check and ensure the economy doesn't get overheated. More than 2/3 of housing loans will be up for renewal in the next 12 months, and Bank Governor Adrian Orr says borrowers must be prepared.
Households who have a lot of debt or homeowners who have just entered the market with extremely high leverage levels have to be incredibly wary and understand they're going to have to be able to weather through higher interest rates.
Adrian Orr says the cash rate is likely to head towards 2.5% over the next couple of years. Armed police are guarding a cordoned-off street in West Auckland. Detective Inspector Kevin McNaughton says a man is in Auckland Hospital in a critical condition. He says initial inquiries suggest the man was injured in a street brawl. One resident of Virgo Place in the suburb of Glen Eden says an abandoned house on the street is a regular trouble spot. A woman who lives nearby says she heard what she thought were gunshots, followed by a car speeding off. The police say several people are being spoken to. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights are Pisalome Mavono and Regina Shivens on their book Mana of the Pacific. What began as research into the impact of COVID-19 turned into a celebration of Pasifika wisdom. Dick Tipping's checking out new jazz releases for Inside Out, including a reworking of a 1957 classic on original instruments. And this week's Hump Prize, Out Here, an anthology of writing from Aotearoa's rainbow community, on Nights with me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from mid-service to midnight Thursday. Northland to Waitomo, including Coromandel, Bay of Plenty, Taupo and Taumaranui. Cloudy at times. Isolated showers and possibly heavy in Northland this evening. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, fine tomorrow. Taranaki to Wellington, including Taihape and Wairarapa. Mainly fine, cloud increasing tomorrow evening. Nelson, Marlborough and Canterbury, fine, isolated showers inland this evening. A chance of early fog for parts of the Canterbury Plains tomorrow. Bulla and Westland fine today apart from isolated showers inland this evening. Cloud increasing tomorrow with a few showers from the afternoon. Otago and Southland mainly fine, however a few light spots of rain tomorrow night. For Fiordland, cloudy with drizzle for tomorrow, turning to rain at night. And for our friends in Rekohu, the Chatham Islands cloudy at times. It's coming up to 7 minutes past 6.
Thanks, Marama. No mai hoki mai. This is Checkpoint. Ko Lisa Owen tēnei. The border's slowly winching open, but New Zealanders overseas will still have to wait until mid-January to avoid managed isolation on arrival. This means no early Christmas present for families desperate to be reunited for the summer holidays. But the government denies being the Christmas Grinch. From January 17th, fully vaccinated eligible travellers from Australia can come to New Zealand, but they'll have to do 7 days home isolation. In mid-February, this will extend to all other countries, and from the end of April will widen to include all foreign travellers who meet the public health criteria. All arrivals will require a negative pre-departure test and will need to isolate at home. Here's our political editor, Jane Patterson.
The first border plan, reconnecting New Zealanders to the world, was unveiled in August, but this latest version looks quite different. The main thing, scrapping the use of low, medium and high risk ratings for different countries to determine where people would have to isolate and for how long. But there's a bit longer to wait for the new look regime.
I do know and I acknowledge that some people and businesses want us to open up before Christmas, and that is very understandable. Others want us to be more cautious and take even longer to open up.
The border's always been a major point of risk, and COVID-19 Response Minister Chris Hipkins says New Zealand still has to be cautious.
There does continue to be a global pandemic with case numbers surging in Europe and in other parts of the world. So we need to be careful about reopening of our border.
He acknowledged the impact of MIQ.
Families have been separated. People have found themselves having to shelter in places they did not expect to stay for prolonged periods of time.
If you're vaccinated and haven't been in a very high-risk country, you'll have to isolate at home, take a day one test and return a final negative test before entering the community. Self-isolation will also look different. People can isolate at home alongside other members of the household who are not and who can still go about their daily lives.
So there's a lot more freedom associated with home isolation than there is with being an MIQ. So, and again, that just increases the cumulative risk that exists around this. So it's not we are entering a stage where we're opening up that medium risk pathway. It's not a low risk pathway, and we'll be very upfront about that.
National Party leader Judith Collins says the timing is an absolute disgrace, labelling Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern the Grinch who stole Christmas.
They're ripping families apart, and there is no logic nor reason for them to do it. Queensland has 4 active cases as of yesterday. New Zealand had 4,600 active cases as of yesterday. It doesn't make sense.
Ms Ardern says it's not about stopping people coming home for Christmas.
We have a responsibility to make sure that New Zealanders have the Christmas they deserve, and that does mean that we will act very cautiously as we move to reopen New Zealand and make changes at the international border.
In the background, the legislative wheels have been turning, with a bill setting up the traffic light system, including mandated vaccinations for a range of workforces, passed under urgency today, to the outrage of the opposition.
To ram it through without a select committee process and without any post-enactment scrutiny sends the message to the anti-vaxxers out there and those concerned about mandates and those concerned about certificates. It sends the message that they do have something to fear, that there is something to hide.
Parliament's now turned its attention to a second bill being debated under urgency, which makes changes to the business support scheme and working for families tax credits.
It's thought exporters will be among the first to make use of the scrapping of MIQ, with many desperate to reconnect with overseas markets. The Employers and Manufacturers Association Head of Advocacy and Strategy, Alan McDonald, joins us now. Alan, what does the announcement mean for your members?
Oh, look, our members have been literally gagging to get out of the country for quite some time to reconnect with their customers and their markets and just, work on those relationships and orders and all of those things they need to do. So I suspect there'll be a long queue of people at the airport when they can get out to go and see their customers.
How damaging have the closed borders been to them?
Oh, it's been very tough for a number of them. We've been hearing stories for months now about the response from their customers overseas. What do you mean you're in lockdowns? What do you mean you can't get here? The rest of the world's kind of moved on and doing things. Why can't you guys? We'll just go somewhere else and fill our orders. That sort of response. So, it'll be a huge relief for those exporters and manufacturers that are sending their stuff overseas, that they'll be able to get out there and start repairing those damaged relationships and building on them to increase orders and do all those good things that our export community does.
Given that they want it so badly, is it happening fast enough?
No, probably not. A little surprised it's taking as long as it is, but the government's demonstrated time and time again that it's very cautious.
Why does it surprise you?
There's been talk around lifting of restrictions for MIQ and different timeframes given right throughout the conversations. As last week when we hosted the Prime Minister, she was talking the first quarter of next year, which she's consistently done, but we were expecting that at the back end. Now it's at the front end. Elsewhere around the place, people have been talking about before Christmas. So it just demonstrates that the government's cautious approach again.
So in terms of business contacts coming here, who's going to want to come here and self-isolate for 7 days if they're coming on a business trip?
Well, there'll be a number of people. For example, there are specialist technicians that need to come into the country to do warranty checks and technical specs on specialist bits of machineries, and they won't honour those warranties unless they can come here. So they've been holding off, A, because they couldn't get into MIQ, and B, there was so much uncertainty around it. So they'll be able to come. So they'll be in fairly quickly to start working on those bits of machinery and technology that they need to certify. I think you'll also see specialist people that are required for short-term contracts will be queuing up to get in as well. 7 days, it doesn't really matter much if you're on a 3, 6, 9 month contract or something like that. So those sorts of people will be coming very quickly.
Is it enough, though, to fix labour shortages? Because obviously we are potentially competing with Australia, and skilled migrants may choose to go there. They're opening up from the 1st of December, and it seems less complicated, their system.
No, it'll do nothing for the skill shortages we've got here. We're not competing just against Australia, we're also competing against Canada, and both of those countries tend to fish in the same migration pools that we look for our talent in. And worldwide, there's a bit of an international race for talent. So that's still unanswered. What's our immigration reset going to be? How's immigration going to work in the future? How are we going to plug those skills gaps? Because, they keep talking about we'll train up New Zealanders. That takes time. We've got an immediate short and medium-term problem that was bad pre-COVID and is worse now that the border has been shut for so long. We've got skill shortages across multiple sectors that are stopping businesses expanding and growing.
Now, I know you were concerned about freight coming by air and the loss potentially of international airline connections because of uncertainty and no dates. Is this enough to keep those airlines coming in the meantime?
Well, I think the number's something like 70 to 80% of all freight arrives on passenger flights. So passenger movement's still fairly restricted, but it will send a bit of a signal to some of those airlines that were really hesitant, and they were getting ready to pull out. We've been talking to Auckland Airport and Air New Zealand, so it will give them a bit of a signal that things are reopening, and it should go some way to allaying that concern.
Any particular airlines that were looking to pull the pin, Alan?
It's just a general discussions I've been having. It hasn't been that specific.
Really appreciate your time. That is Alan McDonald from the Employers and Manufacturers Association. It is 6:15. You're with Checkpoints on RNZ National. More Cook Islanders have arrived in New Zealand, leaving family in exchange for financial stability and a new adventure. Jobs have dried up in Rarotonga due to a lack of tourism, and many within the industry are having to pivot careers after being made redundant. Now, just under 30 new recruits have arrived in Southland to try their hand at a meatworks plant. RNZ Pacific's Alicia Foon and cameraman Nate McKinnon went to Southland to meet them.
At the heart of Southland Matoda lies the Alliance meat processing plant. It's cold and noisy, with beef carcasses hanging from hooks ready to be cut, boned, then packaged for supermarket shelves worldwide. Earlier this month, 27 men and women from the Cook Islands travelled to the South Island to work here. For now, they've committed to a 6-month contract to help make ends meet. Husband and wife duo Sinsamilia Joseph and Danny Rayner, known as mum and dad of the group, were made redundant from their jobs earlier this year.
We're not only here as individuals, we're here as basically a representative of the Cook Islands as a whole, whether you're from Raro, Achu, Manihiki, etc. I mean, there's 15 islands that we've all just scattered from. And then, we're just one big tight-knit family. So not only do we represent the Cook Islands as a whole, as I mentioned, but we also now represent Alliance. So we try and stay together and stay out of trouble together.
They've left 2 children back at home, whilst their eldest son goes to school in Auckland. But they say it's a worthy sacrifice in order to financially support extended family.
A lot of people from the Cook Islands have sort of left and ventured out towards New Zealand to do fruit picking, meat works and some construction works, just due to not enough income down in the islands.
Edmund Okiro says they've created a pocket of the Cook Islands within Invercargill. The only difference being the freezing temperatures, but it's something he's learned to appreciate.
Being down here, down south, especially around from Invercargill to Matoda, is like being like home. It's not busy as Auckland, so it's just, like you get along with people in the community and they'll come talk to you, and then, you see them on the road, just wave back. It's good. Everyone just going to buy a heater for the room and just keep their heater on and just work in the car, back home in the heater for a while, and then out to gym or rugby training. It was too cold, but love the cold.
The 27 new recruits have been split into 2 plants, in Matoda and Oamaru. The group at Matoda are staying at St. Peter's boarding school in Gore.
Kia ora nā, welcome to our house. Come on in.
There's a communal lounge, kitchen, gym, and shared bedrooms with up to 4 single beds per room. It's the first time leaving the island for new recruit Scat Short, whose job was to take tourists on boat rides with Captain Tama's lagoon cruises.
It is good to have all our Cook Island people like coming down here to the South Island, to Invercargill, or here. to experience the lifestyle working and to work harder. I know that's what they're here for, to work hard.
He's not the only staff member from Captain Tama's Lagoon Cruises. Its manager Antonia Poa followed Scat and some of the other crew to work in Aotearoa. She grew up in Huntly, New Zealand, before moving to the islands and says it was time for an adventure.
Girls can do anything the boys can do, sometimes a little bit better. And so I asked if I could come, and I video called Tere, which is our boss at Alliance, and asked if we could come over, and he said yes, and here I am, a meat worker in Invercargill.
But the purpose of her trip quickly changed.
My son got COVID, he's in Melbourne, and for me to get back I needed to get some money. So being here I'll be able to save some money, and I haven't seen him for 2 years because the world's been locked down, and I'm missing him immensely.
Metoda plant production manager Tere Nu has a deep connection to the Cook Islands.
My father originally came over in the 80s in a recruit to the meat plants down on Ocean Beach. We were short of labour a few years ago. I said, hey, look, why don't we go back to the Cook Islands, and they're New Zealand citizens. We can recruit over there. They'd love to come over and work. Hard workers, pick up the jobs quite easy, English speaking. So it's a no-brainer, really. And it's just increased year in, year out.
Although some new recruits have decided to stay on for another year, since Amelia Joseph and Danny Dana will be travelling back to the Cook Islands when the bubble opens up to New Zealand on January 14th.
Yeah. Just to feel the heat and the sand on my toes will be beautiful.
Yeah, it'll be really good.
And to finally hug my children after so long, I can't wait. Yeah, sorry, I get emotional when I talk about them. But yeah.
And we'll put the video up for that story on our webpage. Silver Ferns coach Dame Nolene Taurua says there is vaccine hesitancy among Silver Ferns squad members. The announcement of a quad series in England in January is a big relief as the Silver Ferns build up to the Commonwealth Games in Birmingham next July. Dame Nolene told sports reporter Bridget Tunnicliffe it will also give them an insight into COVID-19 protocols when travelling overseas.
Testing what we need to do in the airport, in training venues, and also in matches as well is really critical for us as a team. And secondly, as you mentioned, we haven't actually flown or been out to sea overseas for such a long time. So we do have new players coming into the mix, and for us to experience what that's going to be like, playing against top opposition. So the timing of everything is so good for us, and it's going to be valuable this trip.
With the rules around international travel now, I imagine it would basically be impossible to be a Silver Fern going forward if you're not fully vaccinated. Is everyone in the current Silver Ferns environment on board with that?
Yeah, we're doing, once again, I think we're not any different from a lot of working environments where our COVID protocols, the standards, and also the overall, Netball New Zealand policies are underway. We're still muddling through of what that means, especially around the traffic lights and also our work with high performance sport and the venues. We've got to make sure that we're aligned in regards to our policies. So I think the biggest probably thing for us is that we cannot get on a plane unless you're double vaccinated going international. So that's pretty much where our starting point is. And obviously the team to go to Commonwealth Games, those protocols or requirements are very stringent. So we're working our way back. December camp, we have that under tow at the moment. So we've got to make sure, one, that people are fully aware of the regulations and that they have, I suppose, the freedom to express themselves as to whether they want to be vaccinated or not, but also that we under clear, I suppose, requirements in regards to travel. So these next 3 or 4 weeks are pretty tight with players, but also we know that we're working through all the stages to make sure we're clean in that respect.
Are there any current Silver Ferns wider squad members who are hesitant about the vaccine?
Yeah, when it did come out, I must say, and that was leading into the Tiny Jamison as well, there were hesitancy or people were unsure. We've worked alongside the New Zealand Players Association as well in regards to further advising players, utilising immunologists as well, and our Dr. Mal Parnell, who's associated with the Silver Fern. So we've gone through different stages with different individuals, and that's up to them, and we won't take that away as to what they want to decide. But we've got to also make sure that we go through the protocols of what's going to happen probably in future, and make sure that we tick all the boxes as much as we can to keep the safety of all staff members, players, but also that freedom of choice.
China is trying to move on from the controversy tennis star Peng Shuai, saying malicious speculation about her well-being should stop. Ms. Peng disappeared from public view a few weeks ago after accusing a former top Chinese official of sexual assault. She has turned up in recent videos, including a video call with the International Olympic Committee, but it's done little to ease concerns. CNN's Will Ripley reports.
She was part of this movement. Free Peng Shuai, the growing call of protesters,
Peng Shuai,
politicians, professional athletes.
We just have to unite and stand together.
A global outcry for the Chinese tennis star many fear is being silenced.
It's time to speak up because there is less than 100 days till the Winter Olympics.
The International Olympic Committee trying to calm the controversy. An IOC statement seems to support the Chinese government narrative that the three-time Olympian is safe and well, despite growing concern for her freedom. The IOC handing out this single image Sunday of a 30-minute video call between Peng, IOC President Thomas Bach, and two other officials. The IOC not giving CNN access to the video, asking to, quote, respect her privacy. An IOC official on the call says, I was relieved to see that Peng Shuai was doing fine, which was our main concern. Some suggest the governing body's real concern is not Peng, but profits. The IOC statement fails to mention Peng's explosive allegations 3 weeks ago that one of China's most senior communist leaders, photographed with the IOC's Bach in 2016, sexually assaulted her. Unlike the IOC, the Women's Tennis Association prepared to pull hundreds of millions of dollars in business out of China, demanding direct communication with Peng, unmonitored, uncensored. The WTA telling CNN, this video does not change our call for a full, fair, and transparent investigation without censorship.
When the history books look back at this time, they will say the WTA, what an incredible masterclass in humanitarian leadership, the right way to do it, to call China on its abuses, and the International Olympic Committee sitting there, as they always do, basically doing nothing.
Which some say makes the IOC complicit in the apparent silencing of a tennis icon who dared to speak out against former Vice Premier Zhang Gaoli. He's known to keep a low profile, portrayed in Chinese propaganda as down-to-earth, a crusader against corruption.
The Communist Party will deal with this as an internal matter. I really doubt that they will actually refer this to prosecutors of the state, because that would raise just too many issues. All senior leaders had the goods on everybody else.
Albert Einstein's manuscript for the general theory of relativity has sold at an auction in Paris for a record $18 million. It's one of just two surviving documents recording how Einstein arrived at one of the greatest discoveries in science. The BBC's Hugh Schofield reports.
54 pages of dense and to most eyes incomprehensible equations constitute this rarest of scientific manuscripts. Around half were written by Einstein, the rest by his collaborator Michel Bessot. And it was Bessot who ended up keeping the document, which was lucky because Einstein had a habit of throwing away his notes. The beauty of the Einstein-Bessot is indeed that it's not the finished general theory of relativity, but a work in progress, showing the genius trying, but at this point still failing, to prove his his new hypothesis about gravity and space-time via calculations of the orbit of the planet Mercury. Vincent Belois, Christie's book specialist, says this is the most valuable Einstein document ever to come up for sale.
When Albert Einstein wrote, we have mostly crude calculations, formulas with very few explanations and very few words. Whereas on the sheets where Michel Basso worked, we see lots of explanations. At that time, Albert Einstein published what was called a draft of the theory of general relativity, but he wasn't yet certain that it was the definitive theory. And to be sure, he had to test his hypothesis.
Not long after, Einstein was able to redo the calculations, this time having changed the figure for the mass of the Sun. And now his general relativity theory was proved, and the equations are still used today.
Some of you pretty excited about the changes to border restrictions. This one in says, I'm in tears, I'm an Australian, sorry, but love New Zealand and lived here since 2004. My dad died at the end of 2019. I haven't seen my mum, who lives in Australia since Christmas 2019. She rings every night in tears. I'm so desperate to hold my mum, I'm an only child, and see her for Christmas. Finally, I just hope that we, her grandsons and I, can get there for Christmas and get back after the 17th of January. There's lots like that. Another person booked a flight to see their parents offshore. Best feeling in the world today, hearing the news about vaccinated Kiwis being able to travel without MIQ. I literally jumped online and booked my ticket. That's all we've got time for. Ko te kaupapa tuatahi a pōpō. Tomorrow from 5 a.m. on First Up, Grant Robertson on whether the Breakers, Warriors and Phoenix Sports Stars can travel back and forth and play matches here now MIQ is being phased out.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. The COVID-19 response minister says the dates are locked in to reopen New Zealand's border next year. The Māori Party has voted against legislation setting up the new traffic light system, saying it's cruel and leaves Māori behind. A Rotorua timber company is offering $3,000 to its staff to get as many workers as possible double-dosed. The head of the Reserve Bank says households and home buyers must get prepared for higher interest rates. Those are the headlines. Our next news and weather is at 7.
Take the pulse of the day's news every weeknight at 10.
I'd heard nothing at all about any abuse, but I did meet an old boy last year who surprised me.